We have a liftoff.
And welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. Someone pointed out to me the other day that I do the millennial pause, which apparently is a thing that millennials do at the beginning of recording a video or an audio thing, where they pause before speaking. And now I cannot unhear it every time I do it, and I cannot stop myself doing it either. So I apologise if that now you can't unhear it either. I've got George Bellshaw and I've got Calvin Betton, our resident tennis broadcaster, writer, and coach, respectively, with me. We're going to go over the last 7 days of tennis news, of which there has once again been an absolute load. We're going to talk about Sky Sports' return to tennis as well, because I've been speaking to a few people there. I've been passing them your comments and complaints, and they've come back to me on one or two things. So we'll discuss that as well. We'll talk about Simona Halep, of course, because we've had a few days to digest that 126-page document detailing her doping charge. We'll talk about the Davis Cup finals, where Britain are through to Malaga rather sensationally, and Jack Draper recorded what I think is one of the greatest videos of all time, quite frankly, being driven home by Andy Murray. Spain are out, Holger Rune has got a back injury, and people are still talking about Ben Shelton and Novak Djokovic. This is Tennis Unfiltered. Right, there's only one place to start, and it's with a 5-star review, obviously. I know. George makes the correct face, the ooh face. It's very short as well. It's from Manny CR in the United States, where I know we have lots of fans. Said, love the US final review. So bold and brilliant. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, Manny. People on YouTube didn't enjoy it quite as much, but I think they might just have thought we weren't paying quite enough attention to their favourite player. But that is, unfortunately, the nature of it. We can't always talk about one person all the time. I think we'll start with Sky Sports, George. First of all, just give me because you're the only one who's in the UK for the whole of the US Open. That doesn't necessarily mean that you watched every match, of course, but just give me a little bit of your take on the frisson of the coverage, the style of it, and kind of what you thought overall. And is it good to have tennis back on Sky instead of on Amazon?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I didn't often stick around for much of the coverage that wasn't the tennis. I would rather be joining matches per se. So I wouldn't say I've got like massively strong views about it. I mean, the bits I did see felt a bit kind of standard, I thought, on the whole. There wasn't much I saw that I thought, wow, this is really radical or different. It's kind of quite safe fat. And I guess, maybe the criticism from that is that we'd been promised something a bit more daring, I suppose. I did kind of miss Amazon a little bit, I have to say. I'd got used to the setup after a few years and kind of having all the screens, and I think for actual tennis fans who've been through the kind of looking glass of Amazon, if you like, it probably was quite a good product by the end. The issue was it was impossible to find for non-tennis fans, and even a little bit tricky for those who knew where they went meant to be going. So there's obvious pros and cons. We'll come on to some of the statistics they've sent you, James, which I found a little bit puzzling from like a kind of broadcasting perspective. I think they're trying to sell something a little bit that is like comparing apples and oranges, I suppose. But yeah, I didn't have any great hate towards it. I just thought it was a bit, seen this before. No great surprises. Actually, probably my biggest complaint is I'm not, and I don't really like picking on people, but I'm not a huge fan of Feliciano Lopez or Bartoli, I have to say. I don't think they do it for me as a commentator. And it's always personal choice, isn't it? But that's my own personal view.
I don't think Feliciano Lopez, if he did listen to our podcast before, still listens to our podcast, because it's not the first time we've mentioned his name, and not in the most glowing of terms. Calvin, kind of similar question, I suppose. You were obviously away in the US for the first half of the US Open, but will have seen some of it coming back. I mean, Amazon had time, and this is the first year, and I would always kind of preface everything by saying teething problems are inevitable, but what were your overall kind of thoughts on it?
Well, I didn't. By the time I got back, I think basically the multi-court thing was done.
by the time I tuned in to watch it, because it was kind of Tuesday by the time Wednesday, actually, by the time I actually got back to watch some tennis. So I don't know how well that worked. I'm hoping that they continue that at every tournament that they have, because that's what Amazon have been absolutely excellent on. And also, selfishly, my job somewhat depends on it, that I can stick the doubles on court 27 when my players are playing. So I really hope that continues, and it would be a huge backward step for tennis if it doesn't, I think. The benefit of Sky is that, as we've said and I've alluded to before, is that you literally turn your telly on and you press 407 or wherever it's on, and the tennis is on. And if you want to watch a different court, you press the red button and you can find them. Whereas Amazon, it was, I think one time I found you had to go through 9 menus to get a match that you wanted to see. Which as silly as it seems, and you'd think it's perfunctory, but it can take you about 5 minutes to do that, and that's a lot of time if you just want to watch a tennis match. Again, I'll echo what George said. I don't rate Bartoli or Feliciano Lopez as commentators. I think they're poor. I'd even go as far as to say Bartoli would turn you off of watching the sport, because she has done it with me. I've had it on, and I just find it completely unlistenable. And it's a combination of, and I hope I'm not sounding offensive when I say this, I don't understand a lot of what she's saying. I don't think she speaks good enough English to be a commentator or a pundit at that level. I find her voice quite grating. And I also think that some of the stuff she says, she doesn't think through, and it just ramble. And it's a combination of all those things. Feliciano Lopez sounded to me like he wasn't particularly interested in commentating. If I'm honest, he just didn't really do anything other than, that was a good shot, I really hope he wins, and stuff like that. And I don't know. To be honest, I'd be surprised if he does have any interest in commentating. He's got his fingers in a lot of pies in tennis, and he seems to be doing a lot politically. I don't think it's something that he will end up doing in the long term. I worry that we might end up with Bartoli in the long term.
I don't know if it's libelous for me to say that there's money involved. Like, obviously there is. Like, he's not doing it for free. Yeah, but I think
he's probably doing all right for himself, James, as well. Like, from what I hear, I don't think the money that you would get for being a commentator, or a tennis commentator anyway, is really going to make a difference to his life. I think some things that they are going to have to do, I'm a bit disappointed that they've kind of... I don't think anyone was actually in New York, and that's one of the things that struck out for me when I was there, was that in the grounds they have these areas where ESPN are recording and that kind of stuff. And I think if we're just going in a studio and we're just going through the same chat with the same names, I don't really see who else you're going to pull in that's going to interest you in the sport. But other than that, I thought the coverage was fine. It's there's only so much you can do with tennis coverage. It's difficult.
So, just on the sort of New York and here angle, so Carthy was out, who people will know from the Today programme and for BBC and lots of other presenting and on-court interviews at Queen's and Wimbledon, to be fair. So she was out there in the alleys for the first week, and then the Emma Patton was out there as well. But then the sort of main crew, your Henmans and your Navratilovas, didn't go out until the second week. So that's fairly standard these days, to be honest. And I know, I wrote a big feature about Sky Sports before the tournament, and I spoke to quite a few people involved, sort of behind the scenes, and they all said, look, the biggest thing we learned from COVID is a lot of our production stuff we can do, remotely. And as someone who finds a huge amount of value in going to tournaments, I don't like to hear that, but I think technical jobs, there is a lot of stuff you can do from across the Atlantic.
It is, but it's not. I think it's not just about we can do this. It's, does it give as good a product? And let's be honest, about 5 years ago, Sky decided they were going to stop spending money on anything other than football, other than Premier League football, really. Their cricket coverage, which what has always been absolutely top class, they stopped going to the tours and that kind of thing. They ran the coverage for most of the tours from a studio in London, and just had 1 or 2 commentators out there. And with that, you lost a lot of the character of the tours and that kind of thing. So I think in particular, same in tennis with cricket, if you just have a studio in London and a tennis court, it could be absolutely anywhere, and you don't get a feeling for where they actually are. Whereas when they're there in the place, it just feels like a different. It gives each tournament a different character.
Georgia, sorry, Georgia, I know you want to come in, but I've been given a statement by Sky, and I think given we've already talked a fair bit about it, it'd be only fair to sort of give them their right of reply, if you like. So here's a statement that Sky were good enough to send me via a spokesperson. They said, "We've been hugely excited to welcome US Open back to Sky Sports and hope the majority of those watching enjoyed what they saw. We welcome feedback from viewers and continually review our output and user experience across all platforms for Sky Sports customers and now members to ensure it's the best it can be." I'll read out some of the complaints and comments that we had from listeners as well, and I've sort of been given a little bit of info on some of those as well, just kind of off the record stuff. So I'm happy to share some of that. But George, you wanted to come in?
I was just going to praise someone for some fun commentary that I actually quite enjoyed, and it was actually Navratilova in the final when she was translating what Djokovic's box was saying.
That was useful.
Kind of tactically going into Medvedev. I think that sort of thing is kind of invaluable, really, for a viewer. The other gripe, and I've said this before, and I think this is. I just cannot stand TV broadcasters flicking away from the match when the players are talking to the umpire at the net during games. And I know, okay, you've got some advertising you need to put on or whatever, but that happens just so frequently, and it's often the most interesting bit of certain matches, in my opinion, and sets the scene for the rest of it. So that is my plea to Sky to, if you see that happening, pause an ad break, take an extra long one some other point. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing I'd add is, and this is nothing really to do with Sky, but from what I could see, and I heard from other people, what really added to the coverage was being able to hear what the coaches were saying to the players.
Yeah,
and I know that it's a contentious subject, as some people seem to think it's bad for the product, which I still can't get my head around why that is. But I think that is really something that is new, that could add to the experience of watching a tennis match.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let me give you, because lots of you were kind enough to send in via email. Remember, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com is where you can email us. At unfilteredtennis is where you can find us on Twitter /X, as I've started reading in copying in a few places. So here are a few of the kind of comments and complaints. I'm going to start with a positive, because there weren't many of them, and this is inevitable. People who deal with customer feedback will know that complaints are much more common than positive ones. I love the fact I haven't got names on all of these, because I anonymised it all before I sent it to Sky. So none of your details have been shared with Sky, I assure you. I love the fact that tennis is back on Sky Sports. I'd like to think this is now a permanent fixture. Cannot stand the Eurosport coverage or the BBC. Have spent years frustratingly researching where and when I can watch tennis on the television in the UK. I don't agree with all of that, but I do agree that it's annoying when you have to find out. It's great when sports are all in the same place. Even like I'm in France for the Rugby World Cup at the moment, and there are 3 different broadcasters showing it on French TV, and French TV is pretty innavigable at the best of times. So it doesn't annoy me. Well, I sent them one from me, which was that as a Virgin Media Sky Sports standard definition subscriber, I couldn't get court choice. I could only get court choice on the app on my phone. I couldn't get it on my laptop or on my TV, and so what I've been told about this is a couple of other people have talked about this. Someone said, I think if you're accessing via Now TV, you just see the court, not even who is playing, like in a little title, which is pretty annoying, I think. There's no catch-up option.
Mine did have the people who are playing a lot of the time.
That's positive. There's no catch-up option. I have noticed this. Like, there's not a lot of match replays being uploaded. I thought that was one of the best things about Amazon, is that you could pretty much, go and find a match. And especially for something like the US Open, where like the best matches are on overnight, and you might want to watch the full replay. I thought that was pretty frustrating. Just to kind of catch up on that. So I know that Now members could watch the US Open across all the different channels with some daily highlights and selected matches available on demand, which, again, like, I think you're making a bed for yourself there. Someone else said barely any replays, perhaps 2 a day that get uploaded after the event, which is nowhere near enough. I mean, I don't know how difficult it is. Like, I'm not a scheduler. I've not had to deal with this, but it seems like a fairly straightforward thing to do. I've also been given some numbers. People will have seen. I don't know if these viewing figures were this week, weren't they? That the women's final did, I think, 3.5 million in the US, and the men's final did about 2.7. First time the women's have beaten the men's in a while, which is pretty remarkable.
Does it not beat the men's every year because of the NFL on a Sunday?
Yeah, I think in part, yeah. But I think in some years it hasn't, like, because there's not always been super interesting finals. Sky told me in the UK it was the highest peak for a US Open women's final since 2015, and the highest peak for a men's final. Peak viewing, sorry. George, go on.
I was going to say, I was absolutely staggered that the 2015 final for the women would be the peak, because that was the year where the US Open women's final, the tickets sold out faster than they'd ever sold out before, because Serena was on for her calendar Grand Slam. She lost in the semi-finals, and it was the two Italian players in the final, Panetta and Vinci, I think. But I cannot believe that translated into a broadcast success. I mean, it's obviously very relative and it went off Sky, but I can't remember. What was the 2016 final? Because I'd have thought, to be perfectly honest...
I'm so glad that we were talking about this in WhatsApp earlier, George, and you didn't ask me that in WhatsApp, but you have asked me live on air. Because I can remember the 2017 final, 26, Kerber beat Pliskova. I mean, it's not exciting.
It's not as big, but I mean, but honestly, Panetta Vinci, would anyone really in the UK be drawn to that match? It feels odd.
There are always circumstantial things with TV ratings. It does happen a lot. I think what's important. So Sky, for example, also I think it was supposed to be the highest ever pay TV or highest pay TV audience since 2015. But Sky have only shown one US Open since 2015 because 2016 was their last one. And I suspect I'm not counting Amazon as pay TV because it's not TV, it's streaming, so it is different.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be higher, though, to be fair.
No.
I was just thinking that one thing that would worry me is just the difference in price that it will cost to watch tennis now from Amazon to, I think it's $8.99 for Amazon. For a student, I think it's $4.99. Whereas if you want a Sky package, you're looking at up to £100 a month.
Well, if you do it through Now TV, it's about 30, right?
Right. Okay.
I think.
Yeah, which is the sort of comparable one. Oh, good. My light's gone out. Oh, the viewers on YouTube, you get a bit more of a moody version of me now because I've lost my light. Anyway, I'm sorry that's not more kind of extensive. I sort of knew that we wouldn't necessarily get, pound for pound explanation because that's not the way these big companies necessarily work. But I'm grateful to Sky. They actually reached out to me and said, "Oh, I heard on your podcast you're going to talk about Sky. Would you like anything?" So I'm very grateful to PRs at Sky for reaching out and getting in touch. And yeah, we'll always give you, the listener, as much chance as possible to get in touch with broadcasters and have your say. That is the whole point. Well, let's move on to some tennis that's happened a bit more recently than the US Open. It's a special day for women's tennis, George, isn't it? Because they're back in China. What a moment for the WTA to be back in China after, I guess, 4 years away. Would you like to trot out your line about WTA going back to China again? I feel like I haven't heard it for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great, is it, really? I mean, they sort of half made a principal stand for a bit. And then finances have done the talking. I do have some sympathy from that perspective. I do think they're in real financial difficulty at the minute, and probably, you do have to take relatively tough decisions, I suppose. But it does all feel a little unsatisfactory. They've not kind of reached a positive conclusion with the Peng Shuai episode, and it's just quite depressing, isn't it, that the world works like this?
Yes, money talks, unfortunately, Calvin.
Yeah, I mean, some people would argue that they didn't take any type of political stance at all, and there were no tournaments missed in China for the WTA through the WTA's boycotting than there would have been missed had they not boycotted at all. And it was just a little bit of PR, and I think the Chinese probably knew they had to do that. I find it quite sad, but it's one of those, isn't it? There's a chance we wouldn't have any women's tennis if they didn't go back to China and various other places where they may end up going in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, I think we might look back on China and think it's just the thin end of the wedge. But
we haven't, still, I don't think there's any resolution to where Peng Shuai actually is there?
George? If we don't mind muddling the items slightly as well on this, I mean, the field in the Masters 1000 in Guadalajara is really disappointing. And it's kind of as a result of this ludicrous calendar you've got now where for one random week shoving people off to Mexico and then they're expected to go back to Asia for the rest of this period. And, I think I saw someone describe it as a challenger event for 1000, which, it's just a shame. Obviously, you're going to have a lot of players lower down the rankings who go there thinking it's a great opportunity for points, but it's just Guadalajara and Mexico have proved to be really good hosts, and it's a shame not to kind of reward them. And B, I think it could have quite a nasty skew on the rankings list in some ways. If looking at that field, someone's going to pick up 1,000 points there who I'm fairly certain would not be picking up 1,000 points elsewhere. So, and that's not an insignificant amount. That's the sort of total that takes you into the top 20 on top of most of the points totals. So, yeah, it feels a bit depressing, really, again, because that should be a tournament that people are really looking forward to after last year.
One unavoidable absentee is Beatrice Haddad-Meyer, who I don't know if anyone saw this, but she pulled out late because, and I think I saw Jose Morgado tweeting about it, the shower box in her hotel room, by which he means the sort of glass, surround of her shower, basically exploded, and she had loads of cuts in her hands. She's needed stitches,
God.
So she's obviously pulled out because she can't play tennis. But yeah, it sounds absolutely terrifying. But definitely on a list of weird injuries to suffer to have to pull out of a tournament.
Crikey.
Very strange indeed. But yeah, disappointing. And as you say, George, Guadalajara has been a really great host. They've had some really good tournaments there. They've sold a lot of tickets there. And as we always say it's like WTA needs good events and can't look gift horses in the mouth, but then equally that's why we're in China. So I don't want to carry on with depressing news, but this has triggered so much debate online, and not that should really steer our commissioning, but anyway, it's going to. We're going to talk about Simona Halep. Simona Halep has been handed a 4-year ban running from when she was provisionally suspended in October last year for 2 doping charges. One, that she tested positive for roxadustat, which is a drug that essentially allows you to take up more oxygen in your bloodstream and improve your aerobic ability. Aerobic, I think. Excuse me. And one of which was an irregularity with her biological passport, which is basically, and my understanding of it is not as strong as it should be because I'm certainly not a scientist, but it's basically the base levels that they use to monitor players, and so that they have a normal level that they can then say when something changes, they can say, oh, well, something has changed here. And the reason that's particularly relevant is because the ITIA says it shows that she was trying to circumvent the dopers, essentially, that she was trying to cover up the fact that she was using roxadustat. They say that she has used it intentionally, and that, as I say, that she was trying to circumvent the anti-doping level. George, she's going to be 35, I believe, when this ban expires, assuming that she does not win her appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which this sort of direction of travel seems to be that she won't. I mean, it should be pointed out the ITIA were asking for a 6-year ban, but they couldn't, even though the tribunal accepted there was a strong suspicion that doping had gone on since March. They could not, to complete satisfaction, prove that it had gone on since then because she wasn't actually tested very much over the summer. I think that's the correct wording. She's got it in front of me, yes. George, do you think she'll come back if she doesn't win her appeal and has to spend 4 years out?
That's a tough question to know, isn't it, really? I think she probably will want to try to from a reputational point of view. Obviously, had Sharapova coming back late in her career. And, not quite as old as Halep, obviously, but she had a spell out and then tried to put things right, I suppose, in inverted commas. It's hard, though, stepping away from a top-level professional sport and trying to just swan back in, particularly at that sort of age. I can't really imagine it going that well for her. But I suspect she might want to try. And I mean, I'm almost reluctant to sort of have this hypothetical conversation until it's gone through the appeal process, because every time you think it's a slam dunk sort of thing in this sort of arena, something weird happens, and it can be reduced quite significantly. I mean, if I were a betting man, I'd probably back it to go down to 18 months or 2 years or something. But you're not so convinced. And
no,
I
because
hope not, if they've got the proof, because they do need to have stricter sanctions on this sort of stuff.
So, kind of as we discussed privately, yes, often bans do go to Court of Arbitration for Sport and get reduced. But more often than not, it's because the ITAA or whatever sport it might be, want to come down very harshly on the strict liability. If something's in your blood system, you've doped. It doesn't matter whether it's intentional or not. The specificities of a ban can depend. But they want to be seen to be very harsh. And then the Court of Arbitration for Sport generally, or at least certainly in the Sharapova case, for example, said, no, she's not a cheat. This is not a case of someone who is a cheat. They said that in their judgment. And we're going to reduce the ban because it was just unfortunate, basically. And that does often happen, that they accept the excuse of the athlete, basically, and that they do reduce the ban. It's not always that expensive to go to Court of Arbitration for Sport, because if you don't already have the money, then there is a fund in place, basically legal aid, to get you there. I don't think that necessarily is such a slam dunk as you think it is, George, this time, because we are talking about an intentional doper. That is what the tribunal has found, that this was not someone who had a contaminated supplement, that the scientists and tribunal involved have not accepted that. And they have said this is an intentional doper. And then they've also brought a secondary charge of trying to circumvent doping. And for a tribunal to say there is suspicion of doping for a longer period than we have accepted is definitely true. That's very strong. I haven't read lots of these, but I've read a fair few of them, and I don't remember a tribunal often saying, "Oh, well, we are suspicious, but we're not sure, so we can't actually do you for the other months." I think that's pretty rare. And as I say, the ITIA were pushing for a 6-year ban. Calvin, I guess as someone who works in sport, and specifically in tennis, do you want someone who has been an intentional doper getting a 4-year ban? Should we not be of the opinion that someone who is intentionally doped, it gets a lifetime ban, or is that just too extreme?
I think if it's the first time, I think 4 years is fine. It's a hell of a, to take 4 years out of your career, especially as an athlete, is absolutely huge. You can't, and saying, well, I wouldn't even like to get involved in whether she can come back. We just don't know what the world will look like 4 years from now. We don't know what the sport will look like 4 years from now. She couldn't say she's not going to train every day for 4 days before and then come back. That's not how it works. So, I don't know. One thing that surprised me is the amount of players who've come out in support of her, or players and coaches and ex-players, which I found bizarre and doesn't really happen, and I've never seen it happen in any other sport, that when somebody's been found guilty of cheating, they're basically then outcast from the sport. Whereas it seems to be like, and these players who are doing it seem to be basing it on nothing other than she's their friend.
Yeah.
So, this can't possibly have happened. And then weirdness about the stuff about how it took too long. Like, even if she was doing it, well, it just took too long. Well, that's surely it takes however long it takes to find out what happened there. But yeah, I mean, I happen to think, and I know you know more about this, James, than I do, because you've researched it more. I think she will get it reduced just because, and I know this through people in the sport, people in both tennis and football and cricket, who I also know coaches and that kind of thing from. The reputation is strongly that the CAS will always favour the athlete, and they will find a way to favour the athlete. And the classic case of it, as I remember, in football, when Manchester City got their ban for financially doping a few years ago, when it went to the CAS, that seemed like an absolute lock. And even I remember on the day, there were reports that there's no way they can overturn this ban. And they did. They seem to overturn it just on the basis, well, it's probably better for the sport if they're playing. And they found some sort of loopholes and that. So it can't be more. This can't be more of a lock than that was.
Yeah.
And they found it. So I do think that what they'll do, I think it'll be slap on the wrist. They'll say, yeah, I don't think they'll say she intentionally banned. They'll get around it some way, saying that her nutritionist knew, but she didn't. And although she can't be, it is strict liability and that kind of thing. She wasn't entirely aware that she was doing it, so a halfway house of a 1 year stroke 18-month ban, I think, is what we'll end up with. And while ever we keep doing that, we'll show that we're not taking cheating in sport seriously. While ever that keeps happening.
What's the sort of attitude in the locker room? Is it just not talking specificities, but in general, do people talk about doping? Are there lots of rumours about doping? Is it, do people complain about testing? Do they think they don't get tested enough?
I don't think anyone thinks they don't get tested enough. The things what stand out to me that from that point of view in the locker room is that the people who do the tests are not very pleasant, and they're not very helpful either. They can often be, and I think they do go too far on that. But then again, I guess they don't have to be nice. I know that. I'll give a story. I know when Henry, who I coach, he was playing a singles match before he just started playing doubles. Playing a singles match about 14 months ago, and he was winning the match, and it was on a grass court, and he slipped a disc in his back, and he was in some extreme pain, and he had to retire from the match, and he was struggling to walk off the court. And the second that he walks off the court, the drug tester was, you need to take a test. And then I remember Henry going, well, can I just go see the physio and I'll be there in 20 minutes? It's like, no, you need to take a test or you'll receive a ban. And, it's like, let's just have a bit of logic in this. It's like, especially at that tournament, it's a 15K. It's like, if need be, just go and stand there and watch him get his treatment if you want.
Yeah.
And so he ended up having to, and it's not just something you can just, we know it's not something you can just produce. So, that's one of the things that stands out is that the players find the drug testers quite, quite distant and not very helpful. There's the silly thing that they do where you have to list, I think, I don't know the exact number, you have like 3 months in advance, you have to say exactly where you are.
Yeah, it's called whereabouts.
Yeah, which is absolutely impossible for tennis players.
But you can change that. Like, you can change that up to, I think it's up to 24 hours in advance.
Right.
For people who maybe don't know the system, because it's something we're very used to, I suppose. But basically, you have to give an hour of every day where you are able to say where you are. Now, most people say 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. or 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. And what it means is sometimes you'll get a knock on the door and at the address that you've written down for that day. And if you're not there and you don't answer the knock on the door or you don't answer the doorbell, then you get a missed test. And this is what Eliasima got. He got 3 of those. And it always creates arguments. Whenever someone gets done, because you can miss 2, can't miss three, and it always creates arguments because they claim that they only rang my doorbell once and I was asleep, or they only rang my doorbell right at the end of the hour and then drove away, or all sorts of things. Quite frankly, but yes, that's. I suppose, Calvin, to come back to your point about the testers not being very pleasant, I almost don't want them to be. I sort of don't think they should be.
I don't think it needs to be pleasant, James, but I think it does need to be you don't have to sit there and have a chat, but the position, it feels like the position they always take up is, you are a doping cheat, prove to me otherwise. And that's not what it should be. It's like, let's be reasonable here. There's no reason why you can't just be affable and empathetic and that kind of thing. And it's, I don't think there's any reason why that should be the case. And the last thing, to add to what stands out, is that there are certain players and coaches who think that it is rife in the game, that cheating is rife in the game. I'm not as clued up on it as some, but I happen to think, I'll base it on this, that in life people cheat. That's human nature. People will cheat. A certain proportion of people will cheat at anything in life. So why are we to think that wouldn't represent it? That same proportion of people wouldn't represent itself in sport, in any sport, and that's not the proportion that we're finding guilty of cheating. And that's to me is just common sense. So there are certain portion, I'd say about 20% of players and coaches think there is a lot of this stuff going on, and we're not doing enough to catch it. And I'd say about 80% players, either 80% players and coaches, either just it never enters their head, or they're quite. I find there's a naivety in it as well a lot of the time, because I've seen very strong arguments put to players and coaches that certain players are doing something that may be untoward, and the response is, well, they've never tested positive, have they? And that's the thinnest argument of all. You can only test someone for something that you know exists. You can't test it. There's no test for blood spinning. We know that through Lance Armstrong. It's your own blood.
That's what the biological passport is supposed to be able to track.
Yeah. Which now that's coming now, so that you can take that out. But it's like the idea that you can't test. They've never tested positive, so that to me is hugely naive. But yeah, I think, and there are some high-profile players who are absolutely certain that other high-profile players have been cheating in their careers.
George?
Yeah, I was going to say, even kind of putting the cheating aspect of it to one side, I think if you think about elite-level sport as a whole, a lot of it that you hear people talking about marginal gains and things they can do to kind of take that next step forward athletically. I think if someone says, "Oh, we've got this supplement that's going to make you a little bit sharper on the court," it's definitely not banned. It's definitely not an illegal substance. Are people going to turn around and necessarily say, "No, I don't want that extra bit of concentration on court," or whatever it might be? I think that I'm not saying that is the conversation that necessarily happens quite in those terms, but I think Kyrgios put it a little bit flippantly on Twitter. But,
what was it that he said? You have to remind me.
He said something about you could, there's all sorts of things all of them are putting in their bodies that are kind of not natural and whatever. I fuel myself through Coca-Cola and something else or whatever. I think it's probably a bit too flippant and ridiculous there, but there probably is a degree of truth in that is thinking about, okay, what is legal, what can we push the boundaries with?
I think that George,
catching up with them.
I think what George says there makes a lot of sense, and that's how it works. All this, it's not straightforward. It's not like it's not like a nutritionist or a doctor comes to a player and goes, "This is illegal, but if you take it, I think you'll get away with it." It is generally, I would imagine, it is something along the lines of, look, there's this thing that you can take. It will make your performance better. It's not illegal. We think it might become illegal in the future, but by that time we'll have found something else that you will take that isn't illegal, but may become illegal in the future. And that's the feeling that a lot of players have about about other players, and in particular from one particular country.
Just to exactly what Kyrgios said, George, was I run on bananas and Coca-Cola in 5-set battles, and my record in them speaks for itself. Maybe players should just stop taking shady shit, look yourself in the mirror, and at the end of the day say, I did it right, not hard. I mean, I don't even think I have the energy to just pull that to pieces, because it's just.
He also doesn't do that. Look at Nick Kyrgios' 5-set matches. See how many times he's drinking a can of Coke. It's just absolute nonsense.
But also,
again,
stop
the guy just lives
taking
in a alternate.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I also the idea that all you have to do is realize that you did it the right, convince yourself to do it the right way. Calvin, I honestly can't. It's exactly what you said earlier. People will cheat.
Just one final other kind of slightly different angle to take this from. I mean, we saw Serena Williams sort of tweet 8 is a better number, and whether or not this was actually about Halep, she's been deliberately cryptic. You can imagine it would be, but I mean, from her perspective, looking at this result and assuming she is not also a doper, which I'm sure she's not, that must be quite hard to be looking back at that final at Wimbledon and thinking that was a Margaret Court moment, one I could get 24. She's absolutely battered me off the court. She's played brilliant stuff. I do think there's a degree to which, if you are a clean athlete and you're seeing a decision like this going forward about kind of intentionally doping, that must pull on your mind a bit. You must be pretty upset and frustrated by that.
Yeah, I'm sure, and I think that's why it's so important to have a really rigorously clean sport. And I don't think that doping bodies have enough money. I know that doping bodies don't have enough money. That's just true in almost every sport. I think the ITA is not badly funded, but it's a hell of a sport to anti-dope because players are all over the world all of the time, and I think it's probably one of the toughest sports to kind of, the most expensive sports, I should say, to test in. And there are a lot of tournaments, so I think probably they need all the budget they can get their hands on, quite frankly. I think probably as a player you do look at it and go, I wonder if it's the same with match fixing. I'm sure, you must if someone you've played against, Calvin, I sort of imagine it must have happened at some point where someone you've played against or coached against has subsequently been done for match fixing, and it must enter your mind at some point, maybe that match we won in Marrakesh 2 years ago was bent. That's weird.
There was an instance with one of my players in a doubles match where he played with just randomly a player from Argentina, I think it was, or somewhere in South America. And he didn't know the player. They'd just basically signed in together at a tournament that happens a hell of a lot of time at 15 and 25k tournaments. And he'd said, the guy said, do you want to sign in? He was like, yeah, fine. It happens all the time. Now, and this shows where it's not black and white. Things aren't black and white. That the money in 15k doubles in particular is basically nothing. And the points are not really anything either. And the player had said to the player that I coached, I don't want to name them because it's not fair on them, so what happened? The match went on, and I think they won the match. I can't be 100% certain. I think they won the match, and then 3 years went by, and then the player I coached had got a message from, I think it probably was the ITIA, or what are they called? ITIA?
ITIA, yeah. International Tennis Integrity Agency.
Yeah, I think it was from then, saying, basically, we need to have a meeting with you. So he got on a Zoom call and had a discussion, and they basically said, this player you played with for 1 week is under investigation for match fixing. And they said, well, did you give any indication? So he went back and had a look at his messages, because he wasn't friends with this guy by any stretch. Yeah. I very much doubt they spoke before or after this tournament. And what he'd said was, they were both out of the singles at this stage. And what he'd said was, and this, I can't express enough that this message at that level goes round so often because of the lack of money and the cost it takes you to stay in a tournament. And he said something along the lines of, do you want to play full out in this doubles? And it was basically like, are you asked about staying in the doubles or not? Yeah. And that was it. And then I remember, like, I had a conversation with the player who I coached, and he said, like, but it then became apparent that what happened was that the lad who he was playing with basically had, I think he had a wife and 2 kids. This is what the ITIA had told him. He had a wife and 2 kids. He was struggling financially, and this might have happened. And he said, like, I feel a bit bad because I'm basically going to shaft him now, and I don't even know if in that instance it was meaning that kind of thing. It was a message that goes around, that gets sent around all the time, 20 times a year, because there's nothing to be gained from staying in the doubles unless you really, really want to play doubles. And I think the player actually got banned for it. And I don't know whether he got banned for that one instance.
Well,
there
exactly,
obviously were some other instances, but that to me shows that, on that kind of thing, it's not always. And again, and I've heard stories as well about, from the match fixing point of view, where I've heard players who've been in Russia at futures, this goes back 10, 12, 14, 15 years ago. They've been at a tournament in Russia, minding their own business. There's a knock on the door, and somebody says to them, "You are going to lose tomorrow." And what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're a 21-year-old. 21-year-old, you answer your room door. There's 2 guys there who say you're going to lose the match tomorrow. Or when it gets to 4-all, you're going to serve a double fault on the foot. When it gets to the 9th or the 10th game, whenever you're serving, you're going to serve a double fault twice in the game.
And you don't want to see what happens if you don't. Yeah,
exactly. And it's all right going, oh, well, that's cheat, that's match fixing and that kind of thing. But put yourself in that position when you're a 19-year-old, and that's what you get. And it's, and that's what I say. That's what I come back to. It's human nature. People cheat.
Serious stuff. Can we talk about Jack Draper getting pissed and wearing a bucket hat? that would really cheer me up. Probably not. I mean, we've had a lot of great Davis Cup moments over the last few years as Brits, but beating France to make the Davis Cup finals, going down to the final match to win the doubles. They say 4 match points, is that right, in the doubles to make it through?
4, yeah.
And they'll face either Italy or Serbia, my notes tell me. There's so much to talk about here. Andy Murray winning a singles match, an absolute battle as usual on the day of, as it turned out, his grandmother's funeral, which is just maybe the most Andy Murray thing ever, really. I mean, the Davis Cup obviously means so much to him. Leon Smith's various selection calls, 4 different singles players used over the week. I don't know how often we've done that as a British Davis Cup team. Calvin, was this a group that they should have got out of, and therefore we shouldn't be celebrating too sort of vociferously, or actually is this a pretty decent achievement to get out of that group? We've lost Calvin. Okay. Didn't think it was that tough a question, but he's dodged it. George, we should have got out of this group anyway.
I mean, my personal view is we have a pretty strong team at the minute, and I think particularly in that second seed singles position, we've got a good chance to win a lot of matches, even against the very best nations. And then Skapski and Evans have proved to be a really good doubles pairing. So, yeah, I think it's never as easy to say, you should definitely get out of any group. But there were some good teams in there who are capable of big wins. But yeah, I kind of fancy Britain's chances to do pretty well. I mean, obviously they play Serbia next. They're going to have to come through Novak Djokovic, which won't be easy. But actually, I'd give Jack Draper and Andy Murray a pretty good chance of winning as the number 2 seed against most players if they're the guys playing there. So yeah, I think potentially positive times, even if I'm not convinced by some of the selection calls I saw this week, to be perfectly honest.
Calvin, as George rightly points out, probably if we play Serbia, it's going to be a big ask to get further than the quarterfinals. But should we be pleased to have found a way through that group of 4?
Yeah, ish. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think we probably have expected them to get through it. After all, and that's not me trying to sort of mark it down, but it's like I think you'd have probably made them favourites if you looked at the 4 teams. you'd probably made them favourites to finish top as well, I think.
Australia, I think, probably were the ones that I looked at and thought that's,
but
it's
then when you look at it and
matchup dependent.
Yeah, but then, Australia play... You got to remember that Jack's ranking is lower than it should be. His ranking's lower because he's been injured. Right, so Jack's a better player than Kokkinakis. So that wasn't... It's all right, it's not really a master stroke saying we're going to play Jack against Kokkinakis, because that's what you would think would happen. That's what you would think. That would be the obvious thing to do to me. And then, although I did think that they would have played Purcell. I don't know what stage everybody's going to find out, or Australia's going to find out, that Leighton Hewitt, for all as he was an excellent tennis player, is an absolute dunce as a coach or a team captain. Because, what's his record? How does he keep keeping these jobs? And I know they've ended up qualifying. They've got a lot of good players, but it doesn't make any good tactical decisions or anything. I don't know why you brought Kokkinakis in to play that. I'd have played Max Purcell in it, but I think Jack probably would have beaten Max Purcell, to be honest, as well. But and then you got Evo, whose record against de Minaur is excellent. So any way you can get Evo against de Minaur would make sense, especially if you can get Jack Draper as your second. And Jack, to be fair, Jack fully fit. Jack is a legit top 30 player, I think. So I don't, I think that was quite obvious. They Australia have a very good doubles pair. That Purcell and Ebden have won Wimbledon. As a doubles pair. Switzerland, I think Switzerland just don't have any doubles players. So you basically got to win. You got to win the one of the singles and do that. And then France wasn't France's best team. Let's have it right. It's again, I don't want to feel like I'm throwing cold water on it here, but I also I'm trying to be a realist about it. Even the doubles at the end, I don't know why on earth they wouldn't have brought Pierre Hughes Herbert in to play in that doubles. For all that Roger Vasselin is a steady player, you've got Herbert and Mahou have won 5 slams together. They just made the semi-finals of the US Open a week and a half ago. Not even that, a week ago. That blew my mind that they went and did that. And he also adds a bit of youth to it, and that's what Roger Vasselin and Mahou, both still excellent players, but they're both the wrong side of 40. So I think all things being considered, you would say that you'd probably make them fair. We've got a lot of strength in depth in singles. We've got a lot of strength in depth in doubles, but we don't seem to want to pick those players. And I think that might come back to Berners.
Is Draper getting to the point of being almost first name on the singles team sheet, or should he be? I mean, he feels like such a strong number 2 player potentially.
I think you've got to give Evo credit. He's won all 3 matches, didn't he? He won all 6 matches, didn't he?
Did he play all the singles matches? I didn't think he played against...
Didn't play the second day, sorry. Didn't play the second day.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and I know where you're going with that, George, and yeah, I'd say so. At the age he is and what he's capable of doing, I'd say that he probably... You're certainly hoping, if you're Leon now, you're certainly hoping that Jack's going to be fit for all the ties. I don't think that's a wild statement to say, I don't think.
Calvin, you were pretty surprised. Arguably, this shouldn't have been as close as it was, because you were pretty surprised to see Cam Norrie's name on the team sheet for the number 1 singles match against France, weren't you?
Yeah, it's nothing against Cam at all, but he's just not in good form. And I get I understand the reason they did it was they wanted to try and get Evo against Manarino. Because he's got a great record against Manarino. But that's disregard, that's assuming that the French were so stupid that they were going to not spot that and try and get someone else in. It nearly paid off for the French. Fees should have won the match, really, I think. It's only because Evo's such a great competitor and he's an excellent player as well. But having said that, I also was certain that once it got close that Norrie would beat Humbert, because I don't have any faith in Humbert to ever close any match out.
No.
And any big match out. And I think Cam will be kicking himself for serving a double fault on match point. because I think it's a case that once the tighter it gets, make Humbert play balls, and he'll do something crazy.
Yeah. Are we just desperate? I think the draw is potentially tomorrow, so I think by the time you hear this, you will know. But presumably, we're just desperately hoping to get Italy and not get Serbia, right? Like, is there any chance we beat Serbia, Calvin?
Who's Serbia's second single? I mean, is Djokovic definitely going to play if they get there?
Well, he played obviously the group stages, so I would guess that would suggest yes. I know he's pulled out. He's just pulled out of China today. George?
Yeah, he's put a reduced schedule in that is pretty much just, I think, Bercy ATP finals and Davis Cup finals, I think.
Right.
Possibly one other.
I mean, that's...
But he does seem quite geared up.
Sorry, George.
I'd give us a chance against Serbia.
Yeah, what I would say is, again, it's going to come down to selection night. Who would play 2 for Serbia if they went in their rankings?
Dusan Lajovic, I think, was playing 2 for Serbia.
Yeah, then you'd give Drapes. If you could get Drapes in at 2, you'd give him at least a 50-50 against Dusan Lajovic on an indoor hard court. And then it's going to go down to the doubles. And it depends what they do. We know what they're going to do with the doubles. I don't know if that is the right thing to do.
Just on sort of, I mean, Spain aren't going to be there. It's a Davis Cup final knockout without Spain in Spain, which is pretty disastrous for Gerard Piqué. Stan Wawrinka was tweeting this week that there were, I think, 1,000 people in for France against Switzerland in Manchester, which is no slight against Manchester or anyone else, but I think it is a slight against Gerard Piqué, Calvin, isn't it? Like, that every year I feel like now we say this, is like, it's obvious.
I tell you what, once they knew that Spain weren't making it, I bet the people in Malaga were just hoping that Great Britain did, because of all the expats and that kind of thing around Malaga. I think they'll probably still get a pretty big crowd in at Malaga from British.
Djokovic is huge.
Well, Djokovic, but also, that there are, joking aside, there are a hell of a lot of people in the Malaga area from Britain, and a lot of them do like tennis, and they tend to have quite a bit of money to spend as well. So I suspect that, I don't know how big the arena is where it's going to be held, but I suspect that with that, I think Britain will probably be the best supported team there, I would suspect.
Apart from Serbia, just because Djokovic,
Do you think they'll get a lot of people there, though? Like, are there many Serbians going to travel?
But, there's loads of Spanish Djokovic fans. Like, there's no shortage of that. I mean, the guy lives in Spain, basically.
Yeah, and he lives near there. Doesn't live in Marbella.
Yeah, not far away at all.
So, I mean, yeah, possibly so. But it was mad to me, the team that Spain put out, though. Like, wasn't very strong at all, was it?
Their doubles pair was weird. It was Fokina and, was it Granollers? And I'm not convinced. I mean, I don't think they won a single match, or maybe they won one. But that was particularly strange. But
it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of ties in it that you initially think, oh, that'd be a good one. That'd be a good one for Britain. And then you look at it and you think, don't know actually, with that kind of thing. There's some good doubles players left in the tournament. There's who's left in? You got Middelkoop and Koolhof from the Netherlands. Who else? Give me the other countries. I'll tell you.
Canada, Czech Republic, Finland, Australia.
Canada. It depends if who they put out. Amazing that they've actually managed to qualify without any of their big guns. Croatia are still in, aren't they?
No, I believe not. If George's notes are correct. George only
listed 6 teams though on his.
I have to check the checking the record. Fact checking George, something I don't like having to do actually, George. Croatia finished bottom of their group. They were in the group of death with Netherlands, Finland, USA, and Croatia, and USA and Croatia went out. I mean, like, just on a serious note, like, Finland getting out of that group is huge. Otto Virtanen, Emil Ruusuvuori, and then Harry Heliovara. He played with Patrick Niklas Salminen in one of them, and a guy called Patrick Kaukovalter in one of the other
Yeah,
ones.
I think that was Dead Rubber, though, the one that he played. I know
Okay,
Patrick Nicholas Salmon, and Luke beat him in the final of Challenger they won 2 weeks ago.
Oh, there you go. But nevertheless, Otto Burton and Emil Ruusuvuori probably pretty under-celebrated players.
We were talking about this earlier, right? If they're on form, you do not want to play Otto Virtanen and Emil Ruusuvuori. They can,
especially on an indoor court.
Yeah, they can hit a tennis ball, and if they hit a bit of form, which they can do, they're a tough afternoon for anybody. That doesn't surprise me as much as it surprised some other people. Again, on an indoor hard court, there's not many people who's going to fancy that match a great deal. I'd give them a chance against. The problem is that they don't. I mean, Harry's obviously a good doubles player, top class doubles player, but they don't have much to play with him underneath that. I think Patrick Nicholas Salmon actually has been struggling with a back injury for the last 6 months or so. But so you'd think they have to win both singles all the time.
But they're going to draw a seed in the quarterfinals as well. That's the problem. They're going to get one of Canada, Czech Republic, Netherlands, or Great Britain, who I think are all going in as the seeded countries because they'll finish top. So it's not going to be an easy draw. Although it does mean that they're going to avoid Serbia. So as far as I can tell, if I've understood the draw correctly,
it'd be interesting to see what Canada do actually, because none of their. I mean, it depends whether you count Raonic, but say the two others, the two Felix and Shapovalov, they don't warrant a place in the team, but they might also fancy playing, and they'll probably hold quite a bit of political capital there. And it's whether whether the captain goes, no, this is the team that got us there. You two are out.
Well, yeah, it's pretty staggering. I mean, I've heard of Gabriel Diallo, and obviously we all know Vasek Pospisil. I can't say I've ever heard of Alexis Galarneau.
I mean, I know them both. Diallo's Diallo's a good player. Diallo's a big ball striker, big clean ball striker. Alex Garneau, I've come across many times in challenges. He's a talented player. I wouldn't say I'd have him down as somebody who's going to be in the top 50 in the world, but he's a good tennis player. He's a solid tennis player. But would anybody put Shapovalov and Felix out in the hope of winning a tennis match at the minute?
I mean, Felix, he's a very good indoor. Like, indoors is probably his best surface in theory. Like, just with his game and how it kind of works, and not having to hit too many balls, and I mean,
surely they ask Raonic if he's fit. You'd think, because he
would never have played it. He wouldn't have played it. He literally couldn't. Like, he was only ever going to play Wimbledon, Toronto, in the US Open. It was literally just like
he's done.
He wouldn't have played it. Yeah.
Well, he's retired.
Yeah, that was always his plan. Yeah,
I didn't know that. I didn't know he retired. I thought he was talking about maybe, we'll see how it goes.
If he has, that's news to me. But certainly when I spoke to him, all right, this was admittedly before Wimbledon, but I'm pretty sure that was just that, and he was pretty happy to be retiring again. As far as I know. But yeah, I mean, he is. There we go. His news: he's going to Vancouver for the Laver Cup as an alternate. I mean, knows how to make some cash. Give him that. But I don't know about anymore. I think we might have lost Calvin again. George, a few other bits to mop up. Oh, no,
back now,
he's back.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I don't know if there's any other bits to mop up, George. A few bits we haven't mentioned. Holger Rune's got a back injury, which seems to be going on for quite some time. He's been taking a lot of painkillers for it, and might explain why his form's been so bad over the summer. Barbara Krejcikova has won a title in San Diego. Alison Kruger wins the Japan Open. George, anything of that you really wanted to pull the bones out of?
I'd probably just say on Rune, I hope it's not something serious and long term. I mean, they've sort of played it down quite a lot, but I mean, his form really did nosedive off a cliff. And he was starting to establish himself as one of the most consistent players on the tour, and love him or hate him, one of the more interesting characters as well. So I do wish him a speedy recovery, because I think he's someone we do want up around the top of the game, even if he's not really the most popular guy up there.
Yeah, agreed. Calvin, you're out in Saint-Tropez, although it's the Saint-Tropez Challenger. It's not really in Saint-Tropez, is that right?
Yeah, it's not miles away. I mean, I guess it's what you call Saint-Tropez. You think of Saint-Tropez, you think it's the port and the beach and that kind of thing, and the area around that. It's not in that. It's it's about a 15-minute drive, I think, from that. So, being the nature of challenger tournaments, and with doubles being that they usually go on quite late, I'm not sure how much I'll actually get to feel that it's Saint-Tropez. But yeah, I thought, James, before we go, I thought you wanted to have a quick chat about the discussion about Peak Wawrinka against Peak Murray.
Oh yeah, absolutely. George, you left it off the running order, you scumbag.
Shocking.
Yeah, so this kind of came off social media, didn't it? And kind of these hypothetical conversations. Which, well, I tell you what, Calvin, it's not really a hypothetical conversation, is it? Because Peak Murray, I think, as Broads pointed out, Liam Brody, Peak Murray did play Peak Wawrinka quite a lot.
It's actually me who pointed that out, James, on Broads'
sorry.
Yeah. So, much as I love Broads, he doesn't have such a coercient argument that I do. So he was, but yeah, yeah. No, it's not. I found it a bizarre conversation to have. Like Peak Stan would have beaten Peak Murray. Well, they both played in their peaks, and Murray, they both beat each other regularly, and Murray won a few more. But then what I found weird was that, again, it's this weird notion of, I don't want to sound arrogant or anything, people not understanding tennis by going. I understand that it was Courier that made the comment, wasn't it? Jim Courier said Peak Wawrinka would beat Peak Murray.
I think so, yeah.
But it's this idea that the argument was that Wawrinka playing his 9 out of 10 tennis would beat, or his 10 out of 10 tennis would beat Murray playing his 10 out of 10 tennis. Because Wawrinka hits loads of winners and Murray doesn't. But that's not really understanding the game so much. I don't want to say that about Jim Courier, but I think it's something he probably hasn't thought about. Because Andy Murray's entire game is about stopping players playing their 10 out of 10 level and causing them problems and putting them in weird positions on the court where they can't hit their best shots, finding out what their best shots are and avoiding them, finding out what their weaknesses are and putting it there. So just to go, it wouldn't happen that way, that Stan just plays his 10 out of 10 tennis all the time and he beats Murray because Murray's 10 out of 10 tennis doesn't hit as many winners. That would be, you'd have to factor in that this would, if you're talking about Murray's 10 out of 10 tennis, you'd have to think this would be Murray playing his match with the most clarity and the best one of the best tactical thinking minds of all time, really, making the best decisions, finding Stan's weaknesses and doing that. And that then opens up, well, then would it be possible for Stan to play 10 out of 10 tennis if Murray was doing that? So no, it's not like Murray's just going to go, here, Stan, have some mid-court forehands to wrap away on. That's not how it works. So I think it's more. Let me think of the word. Yeah, I don't think it's not hypothetical because they played a lot. But even the hypothetical argument doesn't make any sense.
And just looking at their head-to-head record, which is 13-9 in Murray's favour. Also, incidentally, Murray and Wawrinka are currently next to each other in the world rankings, which is just kind of a weird thing after all these years.
It's 13-9, but I think they've played. I think Stan might be sort of 3-1 up on Murray since they were both definitely past their peaks.
Right. But I was sort of thinking about when I think Andy Murray's peak is, and I would say it's pretty much when he got to world number one at the end of 2016. Is that right? Yes, I think that's right. End of 2016? End of 2015. I remember now.
Yeah.
Which was it?
16.
16. And 2016 was the year that Murray beat Stan at Roland Garros, which, is Murray's worst surface, and he beat Stan 4-2 at World Tour Finals. Now, I suppose you would argue that 2016 Stan won the US Open, so he can't be far off, the kind of peak.
I think I think that's the slam as well, though. That's Stan's won 3 slams. 2 of them he won by just playing lights out stuff. The 2016 one, I mean, he was match point down to Evo in, I think, the 3rd round of that, or the 4th round maybe. Djokovic was on his tree-hugging sabbatical that year and somehow made the final by about 6 of his 7 opponents withdrawing, I think. It was bizarre. Djokovic had a bizarre run to the final of that tournament where cause he was in no sort of form at all going into it and didn't really play well in the tournament. But players just kept withdrawing against him.
He had 3 walkovers, yeah. He had one full walkover, one after 6 games, and one after 2 sets.
Yeah.
Was it Monfils he played in the semi-finals or something? I mean, I'm certain
it was Monfils played in the semi-finals, yeah.
And it was such a bizarre match. I'm certain it was the one where Monfils was trying to moonball him. Just bizarre.
Yeah, so I think and then even the final of that, I think Stan played rubbish in the first set, and then Djokovic kind of won it by default, and then Stan kind of played all right for the rest of it, and Djokovic was just playing how he played that whole year, which was crap. So
George, peak Stan versus peak Murray.
I think peak Murray, actually. I think Calvin's kind of right to point out that peak Murray was just a master at making other people play quite badly. I think this discussion has actually got me thinking a little bit about who is the ultimate peak player who would beat anyone. You might think someone like Novak might be the peak, but I was kind of thinking is there a peak server who, if they had a 10 out of 10 serving day, it's impossible for them to lose because that first shot's just too strong. That's
then they'd have to return that. They'd have to return. I've seen Karlovic play matches where he's just what you can't.
They have a good return there.
It's still their best. Yeah, but their best return isn't very good still. So you're basically going to have to.
Is Pete Kyrgios the best of all time?
No, because it's again. We're assuming again. No, but we're assuming again that peak is all just shot making. It's just that shot making is all there is, right? And is peak Kyrgios's mentality that good? There's no way it is. Even looking at Kyrgios's peak mentality is about 3 out of 10. So if every player, I've said this before, if every player played their best, McEnroe wins. It was impossible to play against, and that goes against anybody he played against. Pete McEnroe won. He still has the record for the best year statistically. He lost 3 matches in a year, and he won the final of Wimbledon. I think he beat Connors in the final of which year? 1984.
No, I said weak era.
He lost 3. Sorry,
weak era.
Again, but again, well, Lendl was around then. Lendl weren't bad.
I famously have a bit of a bee in my body about you and Lendl,
but that's if anybody, it wasn't. I was a bit too young to actually watch him live in his peak. But anybody who knows anything about McEnroe knows that there's never been anybody who had such a natural capacity to play the game as he did, and a clear thinker, a tactical thinker, a shot maker. That all things considered, and again, you don't stick him on court now playing Nadal with a wooden racket and that kind of thing. It's all things being equal. That's what it would have been.
And it's why he can get away with not watching very much tennis and still turning up to a Grand Slam and being a half-decent commentator, even though he very obviously doesn't watch very much tennis. It's like we always do, preview chats with him and stuff. And it's just so obvious that he hasn't watched any tennis since the last Grand Slam. Where he's just Djokovic, you can never rule him out. It's like, Johnny's literally not played a match. You never rule him out. You never rule him out. Right, okay. But yeah, there you go. Right, I think that's quite enough nonsense from us for this week. Thanks to everyone who sent in your emails for Sky Sports. I appreciate we've not given you many answers or maybe many solutions, but what I can tell you is that they have been very sensitive to feedback all the way through, pretty much since they got the rights back. And so I do actually think those views that you've sent across are likely to go quite high up the food chain. I kind of know that from experience. So hopefully
just
that
before we
gives you
go,
a bit of sucker. Calvin.
Can I just nip in? Sorry, I just had a thought there before we go about this peak Murray, peak Stan thing, and that to express kind of what I mean. I'd say even more so than Stan, peak Del Potro, I think, was better than peak Stan. Right, but when Del Potro came back and he was playing phenomenal at those Olympics, he beat Nadal and Djokovic, and he was phenomenal. And Murray found a way to beat him. And that was kind of he still didn't have a backhand, to be fair. He didn't have the backhand that he had originally, but Murray found a way. And it's not like Murray came out and thought, I'm going to beat him by hitting more winners than him, because Del Potro was just tearing through the draw, beating both Djokovic and Nadal in that tournament, coming through just hitting clean winners past everybody. And Murray put him in a position where he just couldn't hit clean winners all the time.
There you go. I'm almost tempted to end on the Juan Martín Del Potro note, but thanks as always for listening. Thank you very much for everyone who's been in touch on Twitter over the last 48 hours. Really enjoyed all your contributions. And most importantly, please do come back next week.